In Girourd, you see a terrible fight between Steve and Joyce. They're husband and wife, and they both work in the military. And the fight takes place throughout the night. I think that's important. During it, Joyce taunts Steve, climbs on top of him, says she's never loved him, he's a terrible lover, she wants a divorce, and the kicker, she says that she's filed abuse charges against him with his commanding officer. Now I want to pause our movie here for a moment. Let me set the stage for what we have. For those who are not in the military, it may not seem like a big deal if a spouse complains to her husband's boss about his behavior. Imagine that Steve worked for a moving company. And imagine that Joyce, really angry, calls up Steve's boss at Acme Furniture Company to complain about him. You think the boss would really care at all? Do you think that her husband would lose his job? Or do you think that all the guys at the company would just laugh it off and kid Steve forever? It's different in the military. These complaints matter. There are consequences to these lodged complaints: loss of rank, loss of position, sometimes even court-martialing. With that as the landscape, this terrible fight, the claim of having filed the charges, let's return to the bedroom where all of this takes place. After asking Joyce if she really had filed the charges against him, Steve did something really interesting. He takes a pillow off the bed with him and he walks into the kitchen. There in the kitchen, he takes a long-handled knife from the kitchen, hides it behind the pillow, comes back into the bedroom. And now we have a standoff between Steve and Joyce. Steve's pressing Joyce. Are you really serious about all of this? Did you really do this? He reported later he was so angry and he kept waiting for Joyce to say that she didn't mean what she had said. When he realized that she wasn't going to take that back, he lunges at her, stabbing her 19 times. And then you see the facts that say he wanted to die. You see his remorse. That's what happened. In a court trial, defendant was convicted of murder too. A court trial is sometimes called a bench trial. That's where the judge is also the trier of fact. There's no jury. It's an interesting strategy for the defense to say we waive the jury. Sometimes the defendant will do that when the defendant believes it's all about the law and not about the facts. That's probably what happened here. So just as we did with our camp counselor example, with Carl's death, let's first see the case from the prosecution's perspective, even before we get into a discussion of voluntary manslaughter. Let's start at murder 2, because it's a purposeful killing. It's a homicide committed with malice. Although there are 4 ways to demonstrate malice, the one that applies here is the intent to kill. Prosecution's going to argue that there was an intent to kill that wasn't justified, wasn't excused, wasn't with mitigation. Steve stabbed his wife to death. In fact, he stabbed her 19 times. Now, can you make an argument that there was premeditation to elevate it to murder 1 using the theory of premeditation? Remember, premeditation is the reflection on the intent to kill. What facts would you use as prosecutor to show that not only did the defendant intend to kill, which qualifies for murder 2, but now he reflected on that killing? That's what makes it premeditation. Using the factors both from Bingham and Anderson, can you find the planning activities prior to killing Joyce? Well, I think it starts with the fact that Steve went into the kitchen with that pillow. Why take a pillow into the kitchen? That must mean he thought about the idea of killing Joyce because he was going to grab a knife from the kitchen. He might use it to hide the knife behind the pillow and bring it back into the bedroom. This is that reference from Bingham that a weapon you bring to the scene feels different from a weapon of opportunity that happens to be there. It's not like Steve grabbed a pair of scissors from the nightstand and used those scissors to kill Joyce. No, he walked into the kitchen with a pillow, grabbed a knife from the kitchen and brought it back to the bedroom. Also, concealing the knife helps to show his planning to kill her. He wanted to surprise her with that knife. He didn't want her to see it. He had already formed the intent to kill, and now he was weighing whether to do it. That's what reflection looks like. In fact, he says to her, "Are you serious?" He's waiting for her to take it all back. That shows his reflection on killing her. Those are the kinds of facts you would put into your own analysis of planning activities for premeditation. We also have a motive here for the killing, although again not required. her taunting words, her actions about having filed charges by calling his supervisor, all of those created the motive to kill her. Sometimes when we talk about premeditation, students have trouble saying the obvious. So let's practice it now. It's so important that the prosecution say bluntly, Steve reflected on killing Joyce. I don't want you to use euphemisms. I don't want you to say, well, he thought about the act, or he was really intending on harming her. No, the prosecution has to say very clearly, Steve thought about killing her. Now, first, remember the defense is going to try to negate premeditation. That's an important posture for the defense to take. Defense is going to argue that Steve wasn't calmly and coolly reflecting on the intent to kill. We have a long argument all through the night. It's also evidenced by the fact that he killed her in somewhat of a frenzy. 19 stab wounds and in the middle of a serious fight might negate the premeditation. Now we're down to murder 2, if we believe that. He also has a very specific claim. He believes that the evidence warrants less than murder. He believes that there's sufficient adequate provocation for a voluntary manslaughter instruction. He wants the crime reduced from murder 2 to manslaughter. Remember, he bears the burden because it's an affirmative defense. He's going to go first. He's going to talk first. Prosecution will have to respond to it. The court gives an excellent definition of voluntary manslaughter. The court says it's an intentional homicide done in a sudden heat of passion, caused by adequate provocation, before there has been a reasonable opportunity to cool. Lots of words packed in to that one sentence. We're going to bust them all out into elements. The court says, I want to assume all these elements are satisfied with the exception of one. Let's assume defendant can prove all these elements. The one that's at issue is adequate provocation. That's the central issue. Was the provocation facing Steve adequate? And the court has to figure that out. What should constitute adequate provocation? That's our element number 3. And who should determine it? Should it be the judge as a matter of law? Or can it be the trier of fact, the judge in this case, or a jury? The court says that to be adequate, the provocation has to be calculated to inflame the passion of a reasonable man and tend to cause him to act for the moment from passion rather than reason. Then the court says, normally only certain kinds of provocations are adequate. Did you spot that paragraph in the case? It's a very limited group of factors. They include the following. The court says discovering one's spouse in the act of sexual intercourse with someone else. Okay, that could move somebody to kill. Mutual combat. I'll meet you behind the bar and you engage in a mutual fight. Or another one is extreme assault and battery. You've been beaten very badly by somebody and you are so enraged because of it. Or an injury to a loved one or a third party. Or finally, resisting unlawful or illegal arrest. No, I'm not the John Smith you're looking for. That's not me. That has enraged that person so much, the person wants to kill the officer arresting him. The court says these make up the only times that a voluntary manslaughter instruction could be given to a jury or be considered by the trier of fact. If one of these factors is not proven, no voluntary manslaughter.